The coffee was still steaming when I understood we were finished. That's the part nobody tells you about the worst moment of your life. It doesn't announce itself with noise. It arrives quiet, wearing an ordinary Tuesday morning like a disguise. Brooke was standing at the kitchen island in Brentwood, holding a white plastic stick with 2 pink lines, and she would not look up at me. We had been trying for this for over a year. Charts on the refrigerator, supplements lined up like soldiers on the bathroom counter. 12 months of hoping time to the day, and I had pictured this exact scene so many times that I thought I already knew every version of it. Her laughing, her crying happy tears, both of us forgetting to breathe. I had never once pictured this version. The one where she held the proof of the thing we'd wanted for a year like it was something she needed to confess to, not share. Brooke. She didn't answer. Her thumb moved back and forth over the plastic casing, the way you touch something you wish you could undo just by touching it long enough. I want you to understand something about me before I go any further, because it matters for everything that comes after. I'm a structural engineer, 14 years designing bridges and overpasses across the Southeast, structures built to carry weight, to hold under pressure they were never supposed to survive. My whole career is built on one skill, finding the load-bearing point before it fails. Reading the hairline crack that tells you the whole beam is already lying to you about how much longer it's got. I read Brooke's face the way I read a stress fracture. And what I read wasn't joy. It was collapse, already in motion, and she just hadn't told me yet. Talk to me, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt, which is its own kind of skill, I suppose. You learn to sound calm standing on a beam you already suspect won't hold. I need you to sit down, she said. I didn't sit down. I stood at the other end of that island, my hand flat on the cold granite, and I watched my wife of 7 years try 3 times to start a sentence and fail 3 times. Her eyes fixed on the countertop like it owed her an explanation she couldn't produce herself. Here's what I keep coming back to, even now. I had spent 12 months imagining this exact kitchen, this exact morning, down to the coffee going cold because we'd both forget to drink it. I got that part right, at least. The coffee did go cold. I just never imagined it going cold for this reason. We met in the spring of 2016, at a birthday dinner near 5 Points in East Nashville. She was a pharmaceutical sales representative who seemed to know half the restaurant. And she had a laugh you could hear across a crowded room before you even knew whose it was. I asked for her number before dessert came. She'd already decided to give it to me before the entree was cleared. We got engaged at sunset on the Cumberland River pedestrian bridge, because she insisted it had to be a bridge. She knew exactly what that would mean to me, and I let her believe for years that the idea had been hers. We married at the Hermitage Hotel in October of 2018. 94 guests, a string quartet, her father's toast that stopped the wait staff mid-stride. Her mother cried from the moment Brooke walked out in her dress until the last song ended. For 4 years, it was everything I'd hoped a marriage could be. Steady, warm, ours. When we decided, in late 2022, to start trying for a family, I believed, completely, without a shadow of doubt, that we were walking into the best chapter either of us had ever written. I did not know yet that Brooke had already started writing a different chapter. One I wasn't in. I'm pregnant, she finally said. I felt something in my chest come loose. That first half second of pure, uncomplicated joy, arriving on instinct before anything else had caught up to it. I actually took a step toward her. Then I saw her flinch. Not away from the news. Away from me. Nathan, I need you to know something before you. Her voice broke apart mid-sentence. She set the test down on the counter like it had gotten too heavy to hold, and for a long moment the only sound in that kitchen was the refrigerator humming and the coffee maker ticking as it cooled. I'm not sure the timing works, she said finally. The way it should. I didn't understand her. Not fully. Not yet. Some part of me, the part that had spent 14 years learning to trust load calculations over gut feeling, was already doing the math before my heart caught up to what the math meant. What are you telling me, Brooke? She looked up at me then, for the first time since I'd walked into that kitchen, and I saw the whole truth sitting behind her eyes before a single word of it reached her mouth. Guilt has a specific architecture. I know it now the way I know the failure point of a steel beam under too much load. I just never expected to find it in my own kitchen, on what should have been the best morning of our marriage. The baby, she said, and her voice was barely a whisper by the time it reached me, might not be yours. The coffee kept getting cold behind her on the counter. Neither one of us would remember to drink it. I had pictured that detail exactly right, 12 months of imagining this morning. And I had gotten one single thing correct. I just never understood, until that exact second, that it would be the only thing. She didn't say another word for almost 3 hours after that, and I want you to understand something about silence like that. As an engineer, I know that silence under load isn't nothing. It's a structure deciding whether it's going to hold. But before I take you through that night, I need to take you back further, because you can't understand how a marriage gets to that kitchen without understanding how it got built in the first place. I've told you the good years already: the sunset proposal on the Cumberland River Bridge, the wedding at the Hermitage, 4 years of a life I never once questioned. What I didn't tell you was how it started to change, because for a long time, I didn't notice the change was happening. That's the thing nobody warns you about betrayal. It doesn't arrive, it accumulates. It started in February of 2023, small enough that I filed it away without a second thought. Brooke's hours at work began shifting. Not dramatically. Pharmaceutical sales has always run on an unpredictable clock: dinners with physicians, regional conferences, hospital administrator events I'd stopped asking too many questions about years ago because the answers were always reasonable. But by late winter, reasonable stopped lining up with what was actually happening. She'd mention a conference running through Thursday in Knoxville. She wouldn't walk through our door until Saturday afternoon. She'd say she had a dinner 15 minutes away in Franklin with a physician group. And she wouldn't get home until close to 11 at night. I always asked, and I always got an answer smooth enough to set the question down again. I want to be honest about something. I'm trained to notice load-bearing failures before they happen. Small stress fractures other people walk right past. And I still walked past these. Because when you've spent 7 years trusting someone completely, doubting them doesn't feel like vigilance. It feels like betrayal in the other direction. Like you're the one doing something wrong just by noticing. Then came the phone. For 7 years, Brooke's phone had lived out in the open. Charging on the kitchen counter, face up. Handed across the console of the car for directions. Read aloud to me in bed when a coworker sent something funny. It was never a thing between us because there was never a reason for it to be. Sometime that spring, without a single conversation about it, that stopped. The phone started going with her everywhere. Face down on the counter. Into the bathroom during showers that ran 15 minutes longer than they used to. On her nightstand each night, tucked just slightly beneath the edge of her pillow, close enough to reach without opening her eyes. I noticed it the way you notice the light change in a room in October. Not alarming, just different. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself a lot of things that spring. The third crack was the hardest one to name, because it wasn't a thing, it was an absence of a thing. It was the way her laugh started sounding different. Not with me anymore, around me. Little references to conversations I hadn't been part of. A private shorthand creeping into her sentences that didn't trace back to anyone I actually knew. I blamed the fertility process. I blamed stress, her job, the ordinary friction that 7 years can wear into a marriage if you're not careful. What I didn't let myself consider, because the alternative was too expensive to hold, was that she wasn't drifting away from us in general. She was drifting towards something specific, somewhere else, and every excuse I built for her was just scaffolding around a hole I hadn't looked into yet. The night everything changed was a Wednesday in September. I got off a job site in Murfreesboro earlier than planned and pulled into our driveway a little past 6, expecting an empty house. It wasn't empty. Brooke's car was there. The house was quiet in that specific way a house gets when someone inside it thinks they're alone. I came in through the garage, hung my keys on the hook by the laundry room out of 14 years of habit. And that's when I heard her voice. Low, careful, coming from the dining room, the kind of voice people use when they've stopped checking whether anyone's listening. I know, just a little more time. I stood in the hallway. I didn't move. He doesn't suspect anything. I'll figure it out. Every structure has a moment where the load finally exceeds what it was built to carry. I felt that moment happen somewhere behind my ribs, standing in my own hallway, in my own house, listening to my wife promise someone I couldn't see that I hadn't figured anything out yet. She came around the corner about 30 seconds later and found me standing there. Her face went through something fast. I watched it happen in real time, watched her rebuild an expression in under 2 seconds the way you'd watch a crew rush to shore up a wall before an inspector arrives. Hey, you're home early. A smile that didn't quite reach past her cheekbones. I was just talking to Alyssa. She and Dad are at it again. Alyssa was her younger sister. Glenn was their father. They did fight, often, believably. It was a good lie. It was built well. I nodded. I walked past her into the kitchen and started heating up leftovers like it was any other Wednesday, because I needed time before I said anything I couldn't take back, and because some part of me, the part that spends 14 years reading stress before it becomes collapse, already understood that I hadn't just overheard a private phone call. I'd heard the sound of a foundation, cracking somewhere I couldn't see yet. In a house I thought I knew every inch of. I never forgot a single word of what she said before she came around that corner. And I never stopped hearing it, not once, in the 6 weeks that came after. I called from a parking garage 2 levels below my office, because some conversations don't belong anywhere you might have to see the person's face afterward. It was a Tuesday morning, 8 days after the dining room. 8 days of coming home, kissing my wife on the cheek, asking about her day. Eating dinner across from her at the same table where I'd once believed nothing could touch us. I hadn't said a word about what I'd heard, not because I was weak, because I understood something from 14 years of reading load calculations. You don't announce that you found a crack in a structure until you know exactly how deep it runs. Announce too early, and the only thing you accomplish is giving the crack time to hide. I found Patrick Reeves through a colleague who'd used him during a custody dispute 2 years back. 15 years with Metro Nashville PD before he went private, working out of a small office on Charlotte Pike on the west side of the city. Thorough, discreet, impossible to rattle, that's what I'd been told, and I needed all three. He answered on the second ring. I need to know what's happening with my wife, I said. I need to know quietly, and I need it done right. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He didn't offer a single word of sympathy I didn't need yet. He asked for facts, her daily schedule, her car, her workplace, and any name that had come up more than it should have. I didn't have a name. Not yet, just a voice on the other end of a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear, and a sentence that had been sitting behind my ribs for over a week. He doesn't suspect anything. 2 weeks, Patrick told me. I'll have something for you in 2 weeks. I want you to understand what those 2 weeks were like, because they were the strangest stretch of my entire marriage. I went to work. I reviewed load specs for an overpass outside Dixon County. I came home and made dinner, chicken thighs one night, pasta the next, and I sat across from Brooke and asked about her day. And she told me about a physician's dinner in Franklin, and I nodded like a man who believed every word of it. I was not lying to her. I want to be precise about that distinction, because it matters to me even now. I simply wasn't finished gathering the truth yet, and a structure under investigation doesn't announce the inspection before it's complete. You watch, you wait, you let the stress reveal itself on its own schedule. Patrick called 4 days in with nothing urgent, just confirmation that he had eyes on her calendar, that a pattern was already forming faster than he'd expected. He called again 8 days in, and this time there was something different in his voice. Careful, the tone of a man choosing his words the way you choose your footing on ice. I've got a name, he said. I want another few days before I bring it to you. I want it clean. How clean does a name need to be, Patrick? Clean enough that when I hand you this folder, you never have to ask me if I'm sure. I sat in my truck outside the job site for a long time after that call, engine off, hands on the wheel, doing absolutely nothing, which for a man like me is its own kind of confession. I am not someone who sits still. I am someone who solves problems the moment they present themselves. But there was no problem to solve yet. Only weight to carry, quietly, while a stranger I'd hired watched my marriage from a distance I couldn't yet see. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from performing normal. Sunday, we went to a matinee. Wednesday, she rubbed my shoulders while we watched the news and told me I'd been quiet lately, and I told her work had been heavy, which was true in a way she couldn't have understood. I watched her laugh at something on her phone and turn it face down against her leg before I could see the screen. And I said nothing, because I already knew, in the part of me that reads collapse before it happens, that whatever I was about to receive from Patrick would not surprise me. It would only confirm what I'd already started grieving in silence. 10 days in, he called and asked me to come by the Charlotte Pike office instead of talking on the phone. I told you 2 weeks, I said. I know, he said. I'm ahead of schedule. That's not always good news, Nathan. I sat with that sentence the rest of the drive over, turning it slowly, the way you'd turn a beam in your hands looking for the hairline fracture you already suspect is there. I didn't know the name yet. I didn't know the timeline, the hotel receipts, the amount of money that had quietly funded a second life running parallel to mine. I only knew that in a small office on the west side of Nashville, a folder was being assembled with my name on it and someone else's fingerprints all over the reason for it, and that whatever was inside. I was about to become a very different kind of man the moment I opened it. The folder was thinner than I expected. That's the detail that stayed with me longest, not the contents, not even the name inside it, but the fact that 11 months of my wife's second life fit inside something I could hold in one hand. Patrick set it on the desk between us and didn't push it toward me right away. He just let it sit there, closed, while he talked me through it in the flat, procedural voice of a man who'd done this more times than either of us wanted to think about. His name is Tyler Weston, Patrick said. 36. Divorced, no kids, regional sales director for a medical device company. They met at a conference in Charlotte back in December of 2022. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice yet, so I let him keep going. It's been going on since January. About 11 months now. He paused, the way you pause before handing someone something heavier than it looks. His place is in Green Hills. 12 minutes from your house. 12 minutes. I remember doing the math without meaning to, the way I do math on everything. Load calculations running quietly in the back of my mind whether I want them to or not. 12 minutes meant she could leave our kitchen and be sitting across from him before the coffee I'd made that morning even finished going cold. There's more, Patrick said. Dinners at a restaurant on 21 Street. Morning walks out at Radnor Lake, the mornings you thought she had early calls. And 4 documented visits to a hotel near the airport. He tapped the folder once, lightly, like he was marking a boundary he didn't want to cross without my permission. Timestamps, photographs, receipts. It's all in here. I looked at that folder for a long time. I did not open it. I want to explain why, because I've thought about it since, turned it over the way you turn over a beam looking for the flaw you already know is there. It wasn't fear. I'd already heard enough in that dining room 5 weeks earlier to know, in the part of me that reads collapse before it finishes happening, exactly what this folder was going to confirm. Opening it wasn't going to teach me anything my instincts hadn't already told me. What I was afraid of was the moment after. The moment where suspicion turns into fact, and you can never go back to the version of yourself who was still allowed to hope he was wrong. There's one more thing, Patrick said, quieter now. Financials. In 11 months, she's spent close to $14,000 on him. Hotels, flights, dinners, gifts. It's all traceable. $14,000. Not an abstraction, a number with a paper trail, receipts with dates on them, money that had come out of accounts I'd once thought of as ours, redirected quietly into a life running parallel to the one I thought we were building together. I sat with the folder unopened in front of me for what felt like a very long time. Long enough that Patrick finally leaned back in his chair and let the silence stretch, the way a good investigator learns to let silence do the work that questions can't. You all right? He asked eventually. I thought about lying to him. I thought about telling him I was fine, because that's what 14 years of being the calm one, the steady one, the man who fixes problems at 3 in the morning without ever raising his voice, had trained me to say. I didn't lie to him. No, I said, but I'm going to be. I picked the folder up. It weighed almost nothing in my hand. A few sheets of paper, some photographs, a scattering of numbers that would end up meaning the difference between one life and the next. I didn't open it in that office. I put it under my arm, thanked Patrick, and walked out into a Nashville afternoon that looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier, which felt, somehow, like the strangest part of all of it. Because somewhere between that office on Charlotte Pike and my truck in the parking lot, I stopped being a husband still hoping he was wrong. I became a man who knew exactly what he was building toward next. I carried that folder for 3 weeks before Brooke ever knew it existed. 3 weeks of dinners, of small talk, of watching my wife move through our house not knowing that I already had her second life documented in a drawer in my home office. And then, on a Tuesday morning in late November, she sat me down at our kitchen table before I'd even had coffee, and I understood the waiting was finally over. She was holding the same test I'd watched her hold weeks earlier, except now her hands were shaking, and she'd clearly been crying before I ever walked into the room. I need you to sit down, she said, and this time I did. She told me she was pregnant. She told me she wasn't certain the baby was mine. And when I asked her, plainly, to stop managing the information and just tell me the truth, all of it, she finally did. 11 months. Tyler Weston. The timing that made the math impossible no matter which way she turned it. Were you going to tell me at all? I asked. The pause before she answered was long enough to be its own answer. I don't know, she finally said. I want you to notice something about that moment, because it matters for everything that came after. I already had the folder. I already knew Tyler's name, the hotel by the airport, the $14,000. What I didn't have, until that Tuesday, was Brooke choosing to tell me herself instead of me having to present it to her like evidence in a courtroom. That distinction mattered to me. It still does. It's the only reason what came next wasn't rage, it was clarity. Arriving exactly on schedule, the way it does when a structure finally tells you the truth about what it can no longer carry. I stood up. I told her I needed time. I got in my truck and drove 3 hours to my brother Connor's place outside Memphis, and I told him everything, start to finish, the investigator, the folder, the timeline. He didn't offer advice, he just listened, completely, until there was nothing left in me to say. What are you going to do? He asked when I finished. Everything my lawyer told me to, I said. I didn't know yet how quickly her family would try to talk me out of it. Diane arrived the next morning without calling, let herself into my house with a key she'd held for 3 years, and sat down at my dining room table like she'd rehearsed the conversation the entire 45-minute drive over. Nathan, she said, folding her hands the way people do when they want you to mistake composure for reason, what Brooke did was wrong. I'm not here to excuse that. I waited, but she's my daughter, she's pregnant, and what this family needs right now is for everyone to slow down and think about what's actually practical. I asked her to be specific. Be mature about this, Diane said. Accept the situation, give it the time and grace it deserves before you do something that can't be undone. Something like what? Like involving lawyers, like turning a private family matter into something that damages everyone. I told her the lawyers were already involved, that the filing had gone in that morning. Something in her face cracked, just slightly, before she rebuilt it. Nathan, please, be the bigger person here. I am, I said. I'm being exactly the person I need to be. She left an hour later without saying goodbye. I remember thinking, watching her car pull out of the driveway, that Diane had come into my house asking me to absorb 11 months of betrayal and call it grace, and she genuinely expected me to say yes. Glenn called the next morning, quieter than Diane, which somehow made it worse. He'd always called me son. He used the word twice in the first 30 seconds, like it still meant something he was entitled to. I know how much pain you're in, he said, but Brooke's going to need you. That child's going to need stability. What kind of man do you want to be through this, Nathan? I've been thinking about exactly that, I said. I want to be an honest one. A long pause. Then, quieter, with an edge underneath the softness that hadn't been there a second earlier. Her attorney's going to make things very difficult for you if you push this. There it was, the gentle appeal, and beneath it, the thread it had been carrying the whole time. Thank you for letting me know, I said, and I ended the call. Alyssa came 2 days after that. She skipped the compassion angle entirely and went straight for guilt, standing in my doorway like she had every right to be there. You need to drop the divorce, she said. Brooke's scared and pregnant, and you're making everything worse. I'm not making anything, I said. I'm responding to what was already made. Tyler doesn't want to be involved. She told me, if you leave, she'll be alone with a newborn. Is that what you want for her? I looked at her for a long moment before I answered, because I wanted her to hear exactly what she just said to me. Alyssa, I want you to think very carefully about that sentence. About whose choices actually put Brooke in that position. She left without responding. I closed the door and stood in that hallway for a long time. And I understood something I hadn't fully let myself see until that moment. For 7 years, I had been the one absorbing friction in that family so everyone else could stay comfortable. The peacemaker, the reasonable son-in-law who smoothed things over. And every single one of them had just walked into my house, one after another, asking me to keep doing it, to absorb an 11-month affair and a stranger's child the same way I'd once absorbed 100 smaller discomforts, quietly. So the family could go on pretending nothing underneath it was cracked. That night, I wrote 3 letters. Not emails, letters, formal, mailed, unmistakable in their intent. I told Diane, Glenn, and Alyssa that I would have no further contact with them during the legal proceedings except through my attorney's office. That I wished them no harm. That I expected none in return. Diane called 4 times over the next 2 days. I let everyone go to voicemail. Glenn sent a long text about integrity and the man my father had raised me to be. I read it once and never answered. Alyssa showed up at my office building and was turned away at the front desk. I understand how that might sound to some of you, cold, maybe even cruel. But I want you to understand what the alternative was. The alternative was continuing to hand my decisions over to people who had already shown me, 3 separate times in 3 separate ways, exactly what they thought my dignity was worth to them. It wasn't much, and I was done pretending otherwise. David Ashby had told me, from the very first meeting, that this would come down to preparation, not anger. I understood that intellectually. I didn't fully understand it until I watched it happen. I'd hired David weeks before Brooke ever confessed anything, back when I was still the only person in that marriage who knew what I knew. He was a family law attorney out of Cool Springs, recommended by a college roommate who'd once told me David was the kind of lawyer who was 3 moves ahead before you even sat down at the table. Sitting across from him that first time, watching him lay out a plan with the same clean efficiency I brought to a bridge specification, I understood exactly what my roommate had meant. "Don't confront her yet," David had said. "I need the documentation in order first. Nothing changes in your daily behavior. Nothing at all," so I hadn't changed anything. Not until Brooke changed it for both of us, that Tuesday morning at our kitchen table. The filing went in that same afternoon. 8 weeks of quiet preparation compressed into a single document: Patrick's surveillance records. The financial disclosures, the timeline stretching back to that December conference in Charlotte. David had built it the way I build a load path, every piece supporting the next, nothing left exposed. Brooke's attorney was a woman named Carla Finch, known around Nashville for aggressive settlement tactics and a reputation for making opposing counsel regret ever picking a fight with her. 2 days after we served the filing, she called David's office, and I want you to understand what that call actually meant. Because it's easy to miss if you don't know how these things usually go. "They want to move toward settlement fast," David told me that afternoon. "Why? Because they expected you to file in anger. A man who just found out his wife's pregnant with another man's child usually files a scorched earth petition with no documentation behind it, something Carla can pick apart in a week. Instead, you filed with 8 weeks of surveillance, financials, and a paper trail so clean there's nothing for her to attack. That changes the entire negotiation." I felt something settle in my chest hearing that. Not satisfaction, exactly, something closer to the feeling of watching a structure you designed hold under a load test, quiet confirmation that the calculations had been right all along. But Carla wasn't finished. 2 days later, she came back with a different approach entirely, an attempt, David told me, to reframe the entire narrative before it ever reached a judge. A letter arrived at David's office suggesting that my aggressive legal posture and the private investigator I'd hired constituted a pattern of surveillance and control that could be characterized, in her words, as concerning if it ever became relevant to custody discussions down the line. I sat in David's office reading that letter twice. "They're trying to make me the problem," I said. "They're trying," David said, unbothered, "because it's the only card they have left. It won't work. You hired a licensed investigator to document infidelity before you filed. That's not surveillance and control. That's due diligence. Any judge in this state has seen it 1,000 times." He was right, but I want you to sit with that letter for a second the way I had to. 11 months of Brooke's affair, and somehow the opening move from her side was to suggest that I was the one who'd behaved inappropriately. That's the part nobody warns you about a fight like this. The ground doesn't just shift once. It keeps shifting, and you have to keep rechecking your footing every single time. I made one more call myself before any of this reached a courtroom. I called Tyler Weston. I want to be clear about why. Because I know how it might sound. I wasn't calling to threaten him. I called because there was a child coming into the world in a matter of months, and I needed to understand, directly, from him, what his intentions actually were. He didn't answer the first 2 times. On the third, he picked up. "I think we should talk," I said. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said. "Tyler, I'm not calling to threaten you. I'm calling because there's a child coming, whether this conversation is comfortable or not. And I need to know what you're planning to do about that." A long silence stretched out on the line. "I'm not in a position to be a father right now," he finally said. I told Brooke that. "Did you tell her that before or after the affair started?" He didn't answer that one at all. "The courts are going to establish paternity and support regardless of what you decide today," I said. "I'm giving you the chance to get ahead of it on your own terms instead of having it handed to you." I ended the call there. Tennessee is a one-party consent state for recorded calls, which meant I'd been well within my rights to record every word of it, and I forwarded the recording to David that same afternoon. "This helps," he said, after listening to it. "It shows the court he had full knowledge of the situation and no intention of stepping up. That matters." Around the same time, the mandatory financial disclosures started surfacing, something I hadn't fully appreciated until I saw it laid out in black and white. Nearly $14,000 spent over 11 months. Funneled quietly out of accounts I'd once thought of as shared. Hotel rooms, flights, dinners at restaurants I'd never once been taken to. Every dollar of it documented now, time-stamped, impossible to argue away. David also uncovered something else during that disclosure process: the imbalance in what Brooke and I had each brought into the marriage. The down payment on our house in Brentwood, sourced substantially from savings I'd built before we ever met, supplemented by an inheritance from my grandfather I'd invested carefully in the years before our wedding. Tennessee doesn't split marital property automatically down the middle. It divides based on what's equitable given the full circumstances, and the full circumstances, as it turned out, were now entirely on record. This is going to matter at settlement, David told me, tapping the folder of financial disclosures on his desk. Carla knows it too. That letter she sent wasn't strength. It was the first sign that she's already looking for an exit that doesn't damage her client further. I sat back in that office chair, the same kind of quiet, controlled exhaustion I remembered from Patrick's office weeks earlier, except this time it came with something else underneath it. Not triumph, just the particular calm of watching a structure you designed under pressure finally start bearing weight exactly the way it was supposed to. So what happens now? I asked. David closed the folder. Now we let the documentation do what documentation does. It doesn't lie, it doesn't panic. And unlike people, it never once changes its story. He was right about that, too. Everyone in that process had a story they were trying to tell. Brooke's family had theirs: be mature, be reasonable, think about the baby. Carla Finch had hers: surveillance, control, aggression. Tyler had his: I'm not in a position to be a father. I didn't have a story. I had a folder, a timeline, and a paper trail that told the truth whether anyone wanted to hear it or not. That changes the conversation, David had said. It was the truest thing anyone told me during those 8 weeks, and I carried it with me straight into the settlement table. The divorce was finalized 7 months after I filed, on a quiet afternoon in the summer of 2024, in a courtroom that felt almost anticlimactic after everything that had led to it. No raised voices, no last-minute theatrics, just a judge reading through a settlement that reflected, with total accuracy, everything David and I had spent those 7 months documenting. I kept the house in Brentwood. The court agreed it had been funded substantially by assets and inheritance I'd brought into the marriage long before Brooke and I ever said a word to each other. The marital savings were divided with a larger share coming to me, once the disclosures made the imbalance impossible to argue around. No alimony was awarded. Tennessee recognizes adultery as a factor in those determinations, and the judge didn't need much convincing given the paper trail sitting in front of him. Tyler Weston was confirmed as the biological father through court-ordered testing. He was assigned support obligations his own attorney reportedly told him were non-negotiable. He moved to Atlanta within 3 months of the ruling. I heard, secondhand, that the payments haven't exactly been consistent since. Brooke moved into a rental in Murfreesboro. Her career took a hit navigating a newborn largely on her own, because whatever Tyler had promised in private conversations, showing up wasn't part of it. And the family that had once shown up so forcefully in my kitchen, insisting I be mature, be reasonable, absorb it and move on, their urgency thinned out considerably once the reality of a difficult single-parent situation arrived alongside their own retirement years. I want to say something plainly here, because I think it matters. There's a child in the world who had nothing to do with any of the choices that led to their birth. That child deserves every good thing life can offer them. I hope they get it, but I couldn't be the one to build it for them. That was never a door I was in a position to walk through. People have asked me, over time, whether I regret how it ended. Whether, if Brooke had told me the truth early, before 11 months hardened into something permanent, things might have gone differently. Honestly, maybe. I don't believe every betrayal is the same. I don't think a marriage should collapse the first time it's tested. Marriage is harder than anyone tells you before you're standing inside one. And difficulty on its own was never a reason for me to walk away. But 11 months isn't a moment of weakness. It's not a mistake made once, in a lapse of judgment, and regretted the next morning. 11 months is a structure someone builds on purpose, and maintains on purpose, day after day, while looking you directly in the eye and deciding, again, that you don't deserve to know. There's no rebuilding a foundation once you understand it was never load-bearing to begin with. What I found on the other side of all of it surprised me. I expected emptiness, the specific gray quiet of a life with its center removed. Instead, I found something closer to the feeling of setting down a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped noticing how heavy it was. The house was quiet in a way that used to feel like absence, and slowly started to feel like peace instead. I cooked what I actually wanted to eat. I worked late without negotiating it with anyone. One cold Saturday morning, I drove out to a job site in Dixon County before the crew arrived. And I stood alone on the framework of an unfinished overpass, watching the first light come up over the hills, steel and concrete rising clean against the sky, and I thought, for the first time in longer than I could measure, this is still a very good life. 6 months after the divorce, my brother Connor's wife Vanessa set me up with a landscape architect named Claire Mendez, who'd worked with Connor's company on a project in East Nashville. We had dinner at a quiet restaurant on Gallatin Avenue, and 3 hours passed without either of us running out of things to say. I didn't tell her everything that first night. Some things need to be earned before they're offered. But I told her I'd been through something difficult, and she looked at me the way honest people look at each other, straight on, no calculation behind it, and said, "That's okay." So have I. We've been seeing each other for 4 months now. I'm not in a hurry. I'm not trying to fill a space or replace anything. I'm letting something grow the way good things are supposed to grow, foundation first, and everything else after. My grandfather built a house outside Cookeville, Tennessee, back in 1961. He built it himself, over 2 years of evenings and weekends, poured the foundation, framed the walls, set every roof joist by hand. That house is still standing 63 years later. It will stand long after I'm gone. Not because it was the most impressive structure anyone ever built, not because it was expensive. Because it was built right. Because the foundation underneath it was true, and not one part of it was resting on something that couldn't hold weight. I think about that house often these days. I think about what I'm building now, the work, the quiet life I've rebuilt, whatever Claire and I are still finding the shape of. And I think, carefully, about what any of it actually needs in order to stand. I know now, in a way I don't think I fully understood before any of this happened, exactly what kind of foundation I'm willing to build on.